Hi, I'm Cheryl, and I wrote this book, Madness on the Brink of Eco-Apocalypse. Why? Because humans are destroying Earth's life support systems in a whole lot of awful ways, killing off our biodiversity, plastic pollution everywhere, destabilizing the climate. I just couldn't understand, why aren't we doing more to save ourselves? So I looked around and I found some groups, some organizations, some people who are actually doing something. They may not make the news, but in this video series, we are finding out what they are up to inspire the rest of us, including me, to do even more. Because we sure can't wait for the government, the megacorps, or the oligarchs to do it for us. We're here to save ourselves. Today we're chatting with Aaron Thomas, a certified arborist and Director of Urban Forestry with Northeast Trees of Los Angeles, a group which I feature in the book. Aaron oversees large-scale tree planting projects across Los Angeles County and oversees the youth training and community stewardship programs. Full disclosure, I am on the board of Northeast Trees, so I'm already a fan. Welcome, Aaron.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Cheryl.
Our first question here is always to touch a bit of grass, so to speak. So if we were to look beyond those walls behind you, what would we see nature-wise?
Actually, where I live is about 5 minutes from downtown Los Angeles. I live right on the outskirts of the urban core, but I'm fortunate. Well, I very strategically chose to live here because I'm actually surrounded by 3 parks. There's the State Historic Park in front of right across the street from where I live. Elysian Park just to the north of me, and Radio Hill Park just to the south of me. So, and I'm probably a block away from the Los Angeles River. And so it really exemplifies where I live, exemplifies my passion, which is living in and close to nature while also being right in the middle of an urban human environment.
And that's exactly where we need more nature right now, right?
Everywhere, correct.
Well, for me, behind this wall is my favorite tree, Atlas cedar. I may have mentioned him before. He's pretty big part of my life, but he recently got a big haircut for wildfire prevention purposes. So we're seeing a little less of Atlas, but still glad to have him there. Okay, let's get to Northeast Trees. Tell us a little bit about the organization and how you got started.
Sure. Well, in essence, I'm one of the founders. At least I was on the first crew for Northeast Trees. The organization was founded maybe a couple years before I started, around 1990. I came in 1994, so a few years. And it was created by a couple of landscape architects who met while they were in school at Cal Poly Pomona. One of the partners was Scott Wilson. Scott was an amazing person. He taught at some of the most important public high schools in the area: North Hollywood High, Crenshaw High, and then Eagle Rock High School. And he was a horticulture teacher. And very much ahead of his time. Way back in the 50s and 60s, he was already teaching and leading people towards sustainable practices that are now more commonplace. But certainly back then, it was pretty remarkable for a high school teacher to teach about, like, for example, hydroponics and sustainable water systems and soils and arboriculture, etc. So Scott started as a high school teacher. He went on to become a licensed landscape architect. He was a contractor, so he had a license to do construction, and he was a certified arborist. And so he, when retiring from teaching, decided to create a nonprofit organization along with, like I said, one of his colleagues from school, Lynn Dwyer. They decided to create this nonprofit organization that would serve Northeast Los Angeles and really implement all of those skill sets that he embodied. And that's what makes our organization a little bit unique, or stands out a bit from other nonprofits who do similar work. So we are what they call a design build organization. We have, the landscape architecture and landscape design capacity within the organization. We have licensed contractors who can build projects, greening projects like parks or stormwater interventions or what have you. We also have an urban forestry team, which is the one that I lead, and which is led by arborists, certified arborists, who go into primarily disadvantaged communities where there's very few natural resources, very limited tree canopy, very limited park space, and we bring those natural resources, which is a term I don't really like using, but for the sake of the conversation, um, we bring green, we bring nature into the places of the city that most need it. And while we do that, we hire and train young people from these communities. We prepare them for careers in urban forestry or related fields. And as a consequence of working with these young people, there's a huge kind of cascade of benefits that comes out of that. First of all, there's economic development. We actually provide meaningful work to people in those communities. Um, and we're creating a new generation of leaders in the environmental world from these communities. Um, but it's also a really important, I guess, tool or vehicle for engaging the community at large
Mhm.
by hiring these young people and training them how to take care of the natural world around them. They then share that knowledge and information with their own families or their peers, their friends, their neighbors. The community as a whole gets to be engaged through that process. And so it's been an approach, I guess, that's been very successful over the past 35 years. And if it's not broke, don't fix it. We continue. That's the model we use to this day, and it's been going, very well.
And another piece that I would add to that, because I've heard some of the young people that have been trained and work with Northeast trees, I've heard them say things like, I never even noticed what trees were in my neighborhood. I never noticed there wasn't the nature that was there. And now I feel a part of it and I feel connected to it. And so just it gives some rootedness, in that way to nature being a place,
Yeah,
not a
absolutely.
resource, as you say.
And I always say, and this is, Scott Wilson was my mentor. He taught me, the trees are just a vehicle. It's not, the only objective. And so, by working with young people in their communities and raising their awareness, like you said, is just reintroducing them if they didn't already know, or providing them the opportunity to connect with nature around them and also, have make a livelihood from it. Um, can produce bigger things, much bigger results. And for example, just last week, I got a text from a young lady who lives in the projects in South Central Los Angeles. She's graduating from USC this year, and she wrote the most beautiful thank you letter to the crew and to Northeast Trees, because she worked with us literally 2 years ago, but she wanted us to know that she continues to think of us, and we've inspired her, in her words, to give back to her own community. So now she's going to UC Irvine, or she will be going to UC Irvine, and getting a master's degree in public policy so that she can make a positive difference in where she lives. Um, so it's much broader than just the trees.
Yeah. And it also is about the trees. I mean, as we alluded to earlier, you're working in very urban Los Angeles areas for the most part, and trees provide so many benefits everywhere, but especially in an urban environment, like beyond just well, I'm a fan of my Atlas cedar because he's beautiful, but they provide actual services for us too.
That's right. Yeah, very, very important. It's an important part of, like I said earlier, the engagement with community or individuals is leaving a physical, um, you know, result. That
Mhm.
at the end of every day, these crews are not just talking about helping their community; they are doing it, and there is a very specific, result from the work they do and the trees that they plant. Even though they're young trees, they're only most of them are about 8 feet tall. They're still immediately making a difference, a physical difference, beautifying their neighborhood, capturing carbon, shading their buildings, homes, sidewalks, schools, cleaning the air and all the particulate matter and other nasty, air
Mhm.
pollution that unfortunately low-income communities of color are the most, severely subjected to these kind of environmental challenges. And so, um, the list goes on and on, but some of the benefits are mental. Like the mental health of people relies on, and the quality of life of people really relies on the amount of nature that they're living around,
Mhm.
um, and their spiritual well-being. And
Right.
these are not small things we take for granted in other communities. I told you I'm surrounded by 3 parks where I live. Um, in many parts of the county, people in more affluent neighborhoods may take it for granted, but people need to be close to nature.
I write a bit about forest bathing. The practice of going out in the forest is good for mental health and blood pressure, all the things. But studies have also found that just being with a single tree, a street tree, having a moment with a street tree can provide benefits as much as going to a forest. So, and that's for a lot of urban dwellers, that's their nature.
That's right. And I don't like to point out the deficit. I guess, we all know that there's less canopy in neighborhoods like South Central LA than there is in Hancock Park, for example. We know that. But part of my part of my effort is to make people aware that there is nature in the city. It can be in an alleyway, it can be in your backyard, it can be on, like you said, the street trees. Um, Although they may not have the parks that they deserve and should have, nature is around us whether we know it and recognize it or not.
Mhm.
And so that's, I think, part of the fun. It's almost like teaching people to go on an Easter egg hunt every day and find those opportunities or those examples of where, these everywhere we are, there's nature, and we just have to preserve it and take care of it or enhance it and grow it even more.
Mhm.
But it is there.
It is there. And another place that I think Northeast Trees excels is, and we've touched on this a bit, but community engagement. Because it's not just enough to show up in a community with some shovels and start digging holes, but Northeast Trees really builds out those ties, not just with the people, through the young people that work, for the company, but also just talking to neighbors and getting them involved in the project and caring about the project is an important aspect, right?
It's a huge part of what we do. We are a community-based organization ourselves. And really, we were started and founded by a handful of people, Scott Wilson and Lynn Dwyer, and a few others, myself included, who live in Northeast LA. And so we've taken that model of community forestry, of community activism, and where we're invited, we can help others, kind of understand the model that we've taken.
Mhm.
Um, but I do think that it's important to realize when I talk about community engagement, I'm not only speaking about the residents and the people who live in that particular space. The
Mhm.
community is a much larger, combination of, for example, government agencies who work in those areas, stakeholders, business people,
Mhm.
many of whom are the big property and landowners in those communities, and they have a very specific responsibility towards the work that we do. They must be engaged, and they very often, I guess, unfortunately, have to be just as educated and trained
Mm.
as you're out. Many of the residents already understand and know, but city agencies, big, businesses, they don't always understand the need for or understand how to care for the nature in these places. And so that's been one of Northeast Tree's, I think, greatest strengths is bridging those different participants in the community from the resident and the children and all age groups all the way up through the highest level of government or whoever, the entities that are in charge of decision making and have, some influence in those areas.
So as much as we've talked about trees, I know Northeast Trees does work on other types of projects through the other aspects, the design, build, and primarily those are parks and school grounds. Could you tell us a little bit about the other kinds of projects Northeast Trees works on?
Yeah, in fact, when I first started, it was the LA River was really our biggest project, and it's why I became so excited and why I've been here is this entire time, because it's a very big view. By trying to restore, renaturalize, or improve the LA River, we as a small nonprofit we're taking on some pretty big um, goals, and it's much more than, like you said, it's much more than tree planting. We had to start looking at the LA River if in order to really heal it or improve it. We had to look at it from what they say or call the watershed scale.
Mhm.
So it's although we did plant several thousand native trees along the banks of the river itself, and we built, designed, and built numerous parks along the river, along the banks of the river, in order to really, you know, improve, like I said, the health of the river, we had to start thinking on a larger scale because everything that goes into the river is coming from, throughout the watershed, going into what we call the upland habitat areas, the hills and the canyons that feed into the river. Obviously, all of the streets and infrastructure that end up, in the river and carrying along with it pollution and whatever, trash, etc. So consequently, Northeast Trees has become at the forefront of doing, for example, stormwater projects. We've done projects that capture up to 1 million gallons of stormwater before it can enter the LA River. That was our Garvanza Park stormwater project. We've done the first Green Street, which is an example. Basically, we created the template for intercepting water coming from a street that emptied into the LA River, but we can divert that water into underground tanks or cisterns where it can then infiltrate into the ground and be naturally, you know, basically at least neutralized, but even cleansed by the geological processes. Um, that water can also be used for irrigation and therefore not wasted. There's a whole range of important benefits that we can get from learning how to work with nature and not against it, not trying to control it, but to adapt and live in harmony with it. And so stormwater projects, obviously we've done many, many park projects. And then as I was explaining earlier, as we moved away from the river banks themselves and up into what we call the upland habitat, hillside areas nearby the LA River, we then started to really focus on habitat restoration and reducing or in some cases eliminating invasive species that have taken over some of our local hillsides and replacing those with our native plant community. And so we actually have a native plant nursery, which is in Northeast LA, where the young people in our crews have been trained to go out and responsibly and you know after being trained, they go out and collect the seeds of native plants and trees. They process those seeds and then propagate them and grow them into 1 gallon container plants. And then those plants go into the hillsides and the projects where we're working on. And so it's this really very beautiful, you know, um, sustainable cycle process. And that's an example of some of how
That's
our idea of urban forestry is very expansive. It's not just planting street trees and building parks. I often let people know that when you talk about forests, it's not just trees. Forests are made up of animals, soil, water, air. It's an ecosystem, and that's how we look at the work we do. The humans, the wildlife, the soils that um, that are really what actually determine all of the nature that's growing here. The plant life and the animals come from the soil or as a result of the soil, and all of the main components of the urban ecosystem.
Love it. At the nursery you mentioned, I also wanted to point out that's where once a month people can volunteer to come and help with the nursery, right?
That's correct. So everything we do has that sort of the community participation is a part of it, and definitely we teach the community. Those who are interested can come and volunteer at our nursery and learn how to propagate. Now we're very careful to train people that you can't just go out and just collect seeds willy-nilly. That's We don't want people to deplete the seeds because
Wow.
our crews are all trained. You can only remove a certain small percentage off of any given plant, for example, when you're collecting a seed. And there's a right time of year to do it. And you have to leave some that can grow and become food for animals or just regenerate on their own. But people can learn how to help us, propagate plants, grow plants, understand the benefit and the value and the beauty of our local native plants so that they hopefully can, maybe at their own home or school or place of worship or their own business, they can think about maybe we should also use native plants for our landscaping, which obviously are much more beneficial than most of the ornamental non-native plants that we've introduced to Los Angeles.
I love the idea of reconnecting people with just knowing where seeds come from because yes, most people they'd say Home Depot or some garden nursery store, and actually they are in nature. That's what nature uses. So
Yeah, I play a game with people when they first kind of start coming around us and learning more about what we do, and they're interested. And I ask people, can you name 5 trees, like any trees, even just their common name, not a scientific name? And very few people can even answer that question, let alone 5 native plants. Like almost no one, very few people know five native plants. But I tell them, can you name 5 of your favorite cars? They'll rattle them off like that.
good
I
point.
love Volkswagens, I love Porsche, whatever. I love the
Yeah.
Chevy. It's just a weird disconnect that we have I think, mostly in the city. Very few people, even though we are surrounded by nature, we have trees all around us. Native plants are abundant in the hillsides here, but we do have to really educate people and connect them, because most people just don't know. They were never made aware.
Yeah.
Hollywood is another example. Most people don't realize that the name Hollywood um, comes from a plant, the toyon. Um, we all know the name Hollywood because of what it represents, the film industry and
Mhm.
entertainment, glamour, and whatever. But they don't realize it's a plant. It was a plant.
That was inspired that
Mhm.
it looked similar to holly. So that's
Correct.
what happened. Yeah. All right. What one piece of advice would you give to someone who is concerned, say, about what's happening with the planet, with new policies, and just feeling like, I want to be informed, but I'm too depressed to know anything about it. What's something, do you have any advice for
Come work with Northeast Trees.
these plant a
I,
tree?
I think action is imperative. We and this is nothing new. People, life itself, can be very difficult, and I don't even know that it's even any more difficult now than it was 100 years ago. You could make the argument that it was way more difficult 100 years ago. you know, um, Certainly when I was growing up, I grew up at a time of the Cold War where nuclear war was in every young person's mind. We didn't think we would live more than a few years. And I'm not saying that jokingly. My peers back in the 80s, we were really we just thought we were not going to live our full lives. The whole planet could potentially not survive. We have a similar, nuclear war is on very few people. People don't even talk about it anymore, even though it is still a threat. But it's now climate change. And I think instead of becoming paralyzed with fear, instead of becoming dejected and pessimistic, that you act. There's nothing else you can do, really. Otherwise, what's the point of living? I don't know. I don't know how else to say it. But here's the other thing: it should be fun and enjoyable, and
Yes.
it's not some drag like you have to wash clothes every whatever. It is a joy to live in connection with nature. It's
Mm.
not just some dreary obligation that you have to do to save the planet. People will be, I think, overwhelmingly, they will be really pleased to know that by doing the right thing, you're actually improving your own life and the life of the people and the planet around you. So, what do I recommend? If not Northeast Trees, there's many other nonprofits out there who are working in all over the county of Los Angeles. We do live in a very special place, Southern California, where there's an abundance of people like us who do feel very strongly about protecting the planet, and many organizations that are doing great work. Um,
And I mentioned a bunch of organizations in my book for people not in Los Angeles. But I think
and
for me, movement, action, doing something is, it sometimes feels like the heaviest lift, and then it's the best thing I ever did, just to do something when I'm feeling like there's nothing left to do. So
yeah,
make the
go outside
connection.
and pull weeds.
Yeah,
It's
I
great
find
therapy. I'm not
I
kidding.
find pulling weeds so therapeutic. Just
It's
pull it all the way up to the root and get rid of what I don't want. That's just so symbolically and physically satisfying.
exactly.
Is there anything else you would like people to know about Northeast trees that I haven't asked about?
I think we've covered, the big stuff. I've been working at this organization over 30 years, most of my life, and from the first day I started to today, it's been an incredible, not just satisfying, but it's been a joy, and I hope other people can find that sort of joy and fulfillment in their lives, and um, it's worth it.
Yeah.
Find that thing that you care about and do it.
Yes, that's our message.
That's our message.
So how do people get involved or stay up with what's happening at Northeast Trees?
Sure. I'm not a very savvy social media person, but we are on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and certainly our website. You can visit northeasttrees.org, and the calendar of events are up there to invite people, to the different activities and the events that we're hosting. Um, you can certainly contribute and donate on the website as well, or just get, aware and familiar with the different projects that we're doing and the work that we're up to.
Thank you so much. This has been a great conversation. I appreciate all the work that you and Northeast Trees is doing now more than ever, believe me.
Well, it's
But
a pleasure.
if you enjoyed this conversation, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe if you'd like to hear from more community change makers. You can also read about many more inspiring book groups in my book, Madness on the Brink of Eco-Apocalypse. See the links below for that too. Finally, if you have a group that you'd like to recommend for this conversation, please be sure to email me, message me. We want to give a voice to all who are caring for people, plants, and critters, because we sure can't wait for our government, the megacorps, or the oligarchs to do it for us. We're here to save ourselves.